Hi, it's Steph, and we're at the Home Depot, and they have a whole new shipment of perennials, shrubs, trees, evergreens, and annuals. So let's go ahead and take a look at the mid-May inventory at the Home Depot. Check out this gorgeous hydrangea. This is the Eclipse hydrangea by First Editions, and it has this really beautiful dark foliage and these rosy colored blooms. This is a macrophylla or big leaf type hydrangea. Here's the information on it, and look at that picture, how pretty it looks against all of the green in the garden. It really provides a nice contrast and a lot of interest. So this one likes morning sun, afternoon shade, and it gets to be 3 to 5 feet tall and wide, and hardy in zones 5 through 9, and has medium to high water needs. It is gorgeous. This hydrangea is in a number 3 container for $36.98. Right next to the hydrangea, they have some achillea or yarrow, and look how nice and healthy this looks. It's so nice and upright and bushy and has tons of bloom buds. Now this is a really beautiful perennial. It makes such a nice contrast with other perennials in the garden because of this ferny texture on the leaves and the clusters of blooms. Very pretty. So this here is in a number 3 container for $19.98. I don't see the type, but just looking at this bud here, it looks like it's going to be a shade of pink. And look at these beauties. These are also big leaf or macrophylla type hydrangeas. Now the color of the blooms will depend on the soil that you have. So if you have a more acidic soil, the blooms will lean more blue, and if you have a more alkaline soil, they will lean a bit more purple, sometimes even pink. But these are really beautiful. Now these are in Vigoro containers for $14.98. They look like they're just under a gallon, and that's a great price. However, it does not tell you how big they're going to get, so that's a little bit of a wild card. It does say that they like part sun, which is true for these macrophylla type hydrangeas. Most of them want about 4 hours of sun a day to set blooms, but any more than that, if it gets too hot, especially afternoon sun, the leaves can scorch and then your shrub won't be happy. But it does like water, so a moist but well-draining soil, and it blooms spring through fall. Here's the rose-colored option, very pretty as well. And same type of container, it's just called hydrangea, and same size, same spec, same everything, just that one is more blue and the other is more pink. And this beautiful perennial here is the Walker's Low Catmint, also known as Nepeta. Now this is a classic tried and true variety. It gets to be about 24 to 30 inches tall and about 24 to 36 inches wide. It is a very hardy perennial, and it pairs so beautifully with things like roses, Stella d'Oro daylilies, and so many other perennials. It has a minty fragrance, which I find quite pleasant, but the deer and rabbit don't like it, so they stay away from it, which is wonderful. Here is the information. It does like full sun, perennial, deer resistant, drought tolerant. And when you see drought tolerant, it's usually after the perennial is established, a season or two of watering it regularly, and then it can go a little bit longer between waterings. And the height and space on here is definitely wrong. It gets much larger than that, and it has kind of a sprawling habit, which is really pretty. And it is hardy down to negative 40 degrees Fahrenheit. And these are in the Home Depot house brand containers, number 1 size for $9.98. Veronica or Speedwell, which is another one of those spike type or upright perennials that provide vertical interest in the garden. You have the salvias, you have the Russian sage, and Speedwell or Veronica is another one of those. It is actually really pretty, and you can see that there is a bunch of bloom buds getting ready to open up. So this one happens to be purple, and the name of it is Moody Blues Mauve. And the size on these get to be, it says 4 to 12 inches in height, 15 to 24 inch spacing, water when dry, and hardy down to negative 40 degrees Fahrenheit. And it blooms mid to late summer. And right on the side of it is some yarrow, so some more yarrow. This one looks to be a little bit shorter variety. This is also known as achillea, and this one has a really pretty kind of fuchsia colored bloom. Now what I love about yarrow too is that the color of the bloom goes through several shades as it ages. So it will typically start a nice deep color like this, and then it'll age a little bit more, and then it'll continue to fade until the bloom is done. So on one plant, it'll look like there are several colors, and I just love this ferny texture of the foliage and these clusters of blooms. I find them really pretty, and they contrast so nicely with other perennials. Now this yarrow is called the New Vintage Red. So even though it's called red, it does have more of a fuchsia coloring to it. And it gets to be 12 to 18 inches in height and 15 to 18 inches in width. Hardy down to negative 30 degrees Fahrenheit, and it blooms early to late summer. Now something that I've learned about growing yarrow in my garden is that it definitely likes a well-draining soil. So this is one of those that is also really drought tolerant. If you give it too much water, it can flop in the center and it will be unhappy and it can eventually rot at the root. So just don't give it too much water and it'll be pretty happy. Also likes full sun. And these cuties here are dianthus. They look like mini carnations, and dianthus typically have a really pretty foliage because they take on a bit of a bluish color, which is really interesting. They like full sun and they bloom for a while. They are deer resistant. I used to have them planted all up and down my front walkway border. I changed them out so that I could plant different annuals every year, but the deer never touch them. They're an upright perennial that likes full sun, and they get to be 4 to 6 inches in height, 10 to 12 inches in width, and hardy down to 20 degrees Fahrenheit. Negative 20 degrees Fahrenheit. And right on the side of them is a tough as nails perennial. It's the daylily. Now these bloom for a long time, and even when they're not in bloom, they have this clump of grassy foliage that makes them look like an ornamental grass. And these coordinate also so nicely with other perennials in the garden. These are very low maintenance, and fun fact, they're called daylilies because each bloom only lasts a day, but there's always a cluster of blooms, so there's never a shortage of flowers. The deer do really like them, so if you have daylilies and you deal with deer, you'll have to spray some deer and rabbit repellent on the buds so that you get to enjoy their blooms. But this is what they look like. Very pretty. And this variety is the Stella d'Oro. They like full sun. This one gets to be 12 inches in height, needs 24-inch spacing, and it is hardy down to negative 40 degrees Fahrenheit. Blooms early summer through fall. And check out this combination, the Stella d'Oro daylily with the Walker's Low catmint. So pretty. Here's a yarrow that does get very tall. This is the yarrow Moonshine, but what's interesting about this one is that it has a really beautiful silvery foliage, and then it gets these really pretty clusters of light yellow blooms. It's a very pretty perennial. I would say that this is maybe the middle of a border type plant. You'll have some shorter things in front and this as the second layer so that you have the height kind of going upwards, and this would look really nice there. Here are the specs on yarrow Moonshine. It is a perennial for full sun. It is deer resistant and drought tolerant. It is upright growing and it blooms early to late summer. It gets to be 18 to 24 inches in height, and it is hardy down to negative 40 degrees Fahrenheit. And here's another beautiful upright spike type perennial. This is salvia, also known as meadow sage, and the variety is called Noche, and it's very similar in color to my May night salvia. It has an upright growth habit, attracts butterflies. The bees also love salvia. There are always tons of bees all over mine. $9.98 for this. And full sun, 12 to 18 inches in height. They need 12 to 16 inch spacing, hardy down to negative 40 degrees Fahrenheit. And they bloom late spring through midsummer. Now I have a video on my channel that I found by accident a way to prune these where you can get blooms from them most of the summer. And I will link that video below. But I really love salvia in my garden. And you can see how pretty it contrasts with this dianthus right on the side of it. This is another variety of dianthus. You can see how silvery this foliage looks. And this is called Mountain Frost Red Garnet Dianthus, also a perennial. It says it's fragrant, and it gets to be 6 to 8 inches in height, 12 to 14 inch spacing, hardy down to negative 20 degrees. And here is one of my favorite ground covers. This is lamium, also known as dead nettle. Now this is a perennial ground cover, and what's great about this is that if you plant it over several years, it will start to spread. It grows more horizontal than it does vertically, and it will cover your soil, acting as a living mulch. So over time, you'll have to mulch less, which is wonderful. And this variety is called the Dead Nettle Orchid Frost. It gets these tiny little pinkish purple colored blooms. Has a silvery look to the foliage, which is really beautiful. And I have mine planted underneath some trees in a part sun, part shade kind of woodland bed, and it's stunning. It is deer resistant. The deer do not touch it in my garden. It is spreading. It's a decorative ground cover, gets to be 8 to 12 inches in height. And in terms of spacing, it will continue to spread because it roots itself along the ground. So it will get quite wide over time, but very easy to pull out and transplant if you want to do so. And it's hardy down to negative 30 degrees Fahrenheit. If you haven't done your summer containers yet, now is the time, friends. They have plenty of selection here at the Home Depot. So you can see they have tons of Boston ferns, and they even have the Kimberly Queen fern. So the difference between these two is that the Boston fern has a more kind of arching, overhanging habit that looks really beautiful in hanging baskets, and it's also more for shade. So they do not do well in sun. They also like a lot of water. If you put them in sun and you don't give them water, they will crisp up and die quickly. But the Kimberly Queen fern can take less water, and it loves sun. It also has a more upright growth habit, which looks really nice in planters that are down on the ground. So these two have very different growing habits and characteristics, but both very beautiful. So $9.98 for these containers of the Kimberly Queen ferns, and I believe the hanging baskets are somewhere in the $19.98 range. Let's take a look. Yes, they're $18.98 actually, and they're 10-inch hanging baskets. And some 10-inch hanging baskets of New Guinea Impatiens. Now, these are gorgeous. I have fallen in love with the sun patience, which can take more sun. These are more of a part sun type plant, and the impatiens are more of a shade plant. But these are gorgeous, and they're so prolific. They bloom and bloom nonstop all season long. I had mine going from spring around May last year all the way through the end of October when we had our first hard frost. So these, to me, I prefer these over petunias any day. Look how beautiful they are. And they have really thick stems. Anytime that you see a plant with thick stems like this, so the impatiens, begonias, coleus, that means these stems hold on to water. So you don't want to overwater these, okay? That's the quickest way to start rotting your plant, and then the stems will start breaking off. So these are pretty drought tolerant. I would say stick your finger in the soil. If it feels dry to the touch or the soil's pulling away from the sides, it's time to water. And look at this beautiful hanging basket of fuchsia. Now these are great in hanging baskets because you really get to appreciate the flowers that dangle downward. And for some reason, these always remind me of earrings. I think it's the way they hang, but they're beautiful. This is a Vigoro hanging basket. It's a fuchsia hybrid, has a trailing habit, outstanding color, and attracts hummingbirds. $19.98 on these. Some cute rattan baskets with handles with some geraniums inside. What a beautiful combination. Now we just had Mother's Day, so these would have made a really great gift. I love geraniums. They're such a gorgeous old-fashioned plant. My father-in-law used to love these, particularly the red ones. They are really beautiful. Even the foliage, look at that. And a lot of people like to overwinter these. Let me know in the comments if you've ever overwintered geraniums. They are great to overwinter because you're already starting with a more mature plant the following season, and they overwinter really easily. But I really love the baskets on these. They're a plasticky material, so they are weatherproof. You can keep them outside, and they have a liner inside. So you can then, at the end of the season, you can store this, and you can even use it again in the garden next year. $19.98 for these. Remember when this one here, the Supertunia Vista Bubblegum, was all the rage and everyone had to have this petunia? Well, there is a new one in town. This is the Tiara Blue, Supertunia Tiara Blue. It gets to be, let's see, 4 to 12 inches in height, needs 12 to 24 inch spacing, and it is a trailing petunia. These are the quart sizes for $5.98, and it has a gorgeous white eye with some speckling. It is a really pretty and eye-catching petunia. Very pretty. So we'll have to see what the vigor is on this one come next year. I believe this is a newer petunia. First year that it's in the garden centers, but it is really beautiful. So all of these proven winners, 4.5 inch containers, are $5.98 here at the Home Depot. Now, when it comes to lobelia, there was one that I grew last year called the Laguna Sky Blue. This one's Laguna Blue with Eye. But the Laguna Sky Blue was stunning, and it went on and on. It never scolded on me. It just kept pumping out blooms all the way from spring in May when I planted it in my containers until October. It was prolific. So I am definitely growing that one again. Here is the sky blue lobelia that I was talking about. It has this really light blue color, and here's the tag on it, the Laguna Sky Blue. So this is the one that I would recommend if you're looking for lobelia. It did so well for me here in my zone 6B, 7A. This one is loaded with buds and getting ready to put on the bloom show. And one last tip on growing lobelia, even though it says that it's part sun to sun, I find that it grows best in a part sun location that maybe is only a few hours of morning sun but afternoon shade. If you have it planted planted in too much sun, they crisp up really quickly. But that Laguna Sky Blue was an excellent variety for me. And look at this. The Vigoro #1 containers here at my store are 2 for $15, which is excellent because they're typically $10.98 each. And this is lavender. Now, lavender is a Mediterranean plant, so it likes it hot and it likes it dry. So don't plant it somewhere that stays too moist because that's the quickest way for them to die off. And I love rubbing my fingers on them and getting that wonderful fragrance. The bees also love them. It's such a pretty plant to have in the garden. So this variety here is English lavender called Essence Purple. I find that the English lavender, though, can take a little bit more moisture. I've had Munstead lavender planted in my garden for a few years in a bed that stays relatively moist, and it has done okay for me. So this one gets to be 36 inches in height, needs 36 to 48 inch spacing, and it is hardy down to -20 degrees Fahrenheit. Blooms mid to late summer. Right on the side of the lavender, we have some daisies, and these are a shorter variety of Shasta daisy called, let's see, Carpet Angel daisies. And I really like how the petals are kind of split and frilly. Very pretty. Tons of buds on this. It likes full sun, and, well, it does get to be 36 inches in height, which is about the average Shasta daisy size, and it needs 24-inch spacing, hardy down to -20 degrees Fahrenheit, and it blooms early summer through fall. That's a pretty one. And here's a daisy that's even more fluffy. Look at that. So frilly and so pretty. So this one is called Shasta Daisy Sweet Daisy. And this one gets to be 36 inches in height, needs 24-inch spacing, and it is hardy down to -20 degrees Fahrenheit. Blooms early summer through fall. I really like this one. Remember the last time we were here at the Home Depot and we were talking about this Elijah Blue fescue grass? And look at this. It's put up all of its plumes that I think looks like wheat, and they're looking beautiful right now. But then these plumes will dry out and look a bit like straw. And that's the stage where I don't care for it all that much. But I have to say, it is pretty at this point. So this is the information on this grass here, if you are interested in it for your garden. It's the Blue Fescue Elijah Blue. It likes full sun. It is a perennial grass, drought tolerant, deer resistant, and clumping habit. And it gets to be 8 inches in height when it doesn't have the plumes. It obviously gets a bit taller with those bloom plumes, and 18-inch spacing, hardy down to -30 degrees Fahrenheit. Has a really beautiful blue coloring. And another really beautiful spring blooming perennial, Dicentra, also known as bleeding hearts. Now these, when you first see the blooms, they're going to be like little closed hearts, like you see right here. And then as they open up, they look like little hearts that are bleeding, like that. They're very cute. And they have these really beautiful kind of arching stems where all of the blooms hang. And this variety, the foliage appears a little darker to me than some of the varieties that I have in my garden. I think I have like 5 or 6 bleeding hearts now. I love them so much. Now, they do best in a part sun, part shade location. This is what I like to call a specimen perennial because you can plant it as a standalone instead of a drift of a bunch of them, and it gets large enough to stand on its own. So it has a rounded habit, it brightens shades gardens, and it is deer resistant, which I find to be true in my garden. $10.98, but it is part of that sale, so these would be 2 for $15 in the Vigoro containers, and it gets to be 30 inches in height and 36 inches in spacing, and hardy down to -50 degrees Fahrenheit, so very hardy. I absolutely love these for the spring garden. And look at these fluffy golden blooms. These are Coreopsis, also known as tick seed. Now, sometimes you will see them as single petals, but in this case, this one is really frilly and beautiful. This would look gorgeous paired with purple perennials in the garden, things like salvia, even with nepeta, like the Walker's Low that we took a look at. So here is the information on the tick seed, Coreopsis moon squirrel. It says that it has a clumping habit. It grows from 6 to 30 inches in height. That's a wild swing. And 6 to 15 inch spacing. Water when dry, hardy down to -30 degrees Fahrenheit. And it blooms midsummer through fall. Looking at this perennial here, it looks like it will be probably somewhere in the 18 to 24 inch height range. But it does look like it'll be more compact or narrow, but very pretty. Grasses. This one here is called porcupine grass, and you can see that it has a striping or variegated effect, which makes it really interesting. Now, I love the use of ornamental grasses in the landscape because they provide a lot of texture and movement. And this one here likes full sun. Most ornamental grasses do want full sun, otherwise they tend to get floppy and hang over, and you don't want that. So it has a clumping habit. It's great in mixed gardens and deer resistant. Deer typically stay away from ornamental grasses, and this variety gets to be 4 to 5 feet in height and needs 48-inch spacing, hardy down to negative 30 degrees Fahrenheit. And it says it blooms early to late fall. Whenever you see that on a perennial grass, it usually just means that that's when it sends up its plumes. Those are the blooms on grasses, sort of what you see here. Okay. And they'll all look different depending on the variety of grass. Now, this is a beautiful one. It's the purple fountain grass. But learn from my mistake. When I was a newer gardener, I thought that this was perennial in my area, and it is not. This is only perennial in zones 9 and up. Okay, so if you plant this, it is going to be an annual grass. In fact, it is labeled correctly here at my Home Depot as an annual, but it has the most beautiful reddish burgundy color foliage with these really pretty plumes. And these look beautiful as a centerpiece in an annual container. Look at this beautiful sedum. I actually thought this was a hosta from far away. It is so interesting. It has like a lighter yellow color in the center with darker green margins. Very pretty. So this is called, let's see, Autumn Delight Sedum. It looks like it's going to have a deep pink rose-colored bloom, and it gets to be 18 inches in height, needs 18-inch spacing, water when dry, and hardy down to negative 30 degrees Fahrenheit, and blooms late summer. These are great for your late season garden, sedums. They're also very drought tolerant. They actually like soil that leans very dry and in full sun. If you give them too much water, they will sometimes flop in the center, and they can even rot at the crown. But sedums are super easy plants to keep happy, but these are really pretty. $14.98 for these. However, all of the colored pots, the number 2 color pots, are marked for $12.88 right now. So some really great sales to be had at the Home Depot. I hope that you can find these deals at your store as well. And here is a hardy or perennial geranium called Boom Chocolata. I actually added this to my garden last season, and I really like this deep colored foliage that they have. Look at that. It's very pretty. And the blooms are like a light purple. So mine is all leafed out. It's probably going to bloom in the next few weeks, and I can't wait to see that. So they are a full sun, part sun perennial. They get to be 24 to 36 inches in size, and they need 28-inch spacing. They're hardy in zones 4 through 8 or down to negative 30 degrees Fahrenheit. And these here are, it looks like a number 1 container for $12.98. And some foxgloves. Now these are beautiful and a quintessential cottage garden flower. They're a nice tall plant, but something to note about them is that they are toxic. So if you have children or pets that frequent your garden, maybe stay away from them. But otherwise, they're really beautiful and the pollinators love them. You get little bumblebees flying in and out of these bell-shaped blooms all day long. Now, these are also biennials. Even though some of them might be labeled as perennial, they will not usually return the second year. And what a biennial plant is one that will grow all of their leaves and roots in 1 year and then send up its bloom shoots the second year, and then the life cycle is done. But these self-seed prolifically, so they will drop seeds everywhere, and then you'll have baby seedlings and blooms a couple years later. But this here says that it is a perennial, and it's possible that this variety has been bred to be perennial. They are working on that now. It's called Pink Panther. It likes part sun, $14.98, so this would be $12.88 with the sale. They get to be 18 to 22 inches in height and need 12 to 16-inch spacing. Water when dry and hardy down to negative 10 degrees Fahrenheit. They bloom early to mid-summer. And phlox, another really beautiful garden perennial. The thing to note about phlox is that they come in different varieties. So in spring, you'll have the ground cover phlox that is low growing. Then you'll get these garden phloxes, which are a bit taller and bloom at different times of the summer, depending on the variety. They come in different heights and different bloom times. But they need proper spacing because phlox is susceptible to something called powdery mildew. So they need proper airflow around the plants. So you can sometimes fudge spacing on a lot of perennials, but there's a couple of plants I would not do that on, and phlox is one of them. But it is a really pretty perennial. Look at that. It is loaded with buds. So this variety here is It's just called Garden Phlox Super Kapow Fuchsia, and it gets to be 24 to 40 inches in height, needs 18 to 24 inch spacing, hardy down to negative 30 degrees Fahrenheit, and it blooms early summer through fall. And here is the other perennial that I would not fudge spacing requirements on. You definitely want to give this enough spacing. This is Monarda or bee balm, and it is also susceptible to powdery mildew if it doesn't have enough airflow. Now this is a super fragrant plant. The foliage smells so nice and the pollinators love it. The bees, the butterflies, the hummingbirds. It has a frilly bloom like that, and it likes full sun. This variety gets to be 30 to 48 inches in height and needs 18 to 24 inch spacing, hardy down to negative 30 degrees Fahrenheit, and blooms early to late summer. Here's a really pretty yarrow. This is a white variety. Now it's hard to find white flowers for the garden, and a lot of people don't like white because the blooms don't always age the best, but I'm quite a fan of white in the garden. I think it looks really pretty, especially a moon garden. They seem to almost glow in the dark. So this one here looks like a shorter stature yarrow or achillea. Let's see. Oh, well, it says it gets 18 to 24 inches in height, needs 24 inch spacing, water and dry, and hardy down to negative 40 degrees Fahrenheit. Blooms early to late summer. This one's real pretty. Almost looks like baby's breath. This would be great to cut for flower arrangements. Look at this beauty. This is a new perennial that I've never seen before. This is called Centaurea Silver Swirl, and it looks like it could be a Dusty Miller. It is so nice and soft and has the most gorgeous silvery foliage. Look at this. Such a pretty foliage plant. It likes full sun. It is a perennial. And let's see, it says that the space and height varies. And look at that, with the Centaurea and the white yarrow, you have the start of a moon garden. They actually have some of that moonshine yarrow that's in bloom inside the garden center. So you can get a feel for how that silvery foliage looks with that yellow bloom. It's very pretty. And some beautiful lobelia. Now the hummingbirds love this plant. It is so pretty. This one has dark foliage with these rosy colored blooms, and it is called the Lobelia Starship Deep Rose. And this blooms early summer through fall, so it's a little bit of a later plant. And it says water when dry, hardy down to negative 10 degrees Fahrenheit. It likes full sun, and it gets to be 20 to 24 inches in height and needs a 12 to 14 inch spacing. You can see here the dark coloring of the foliage topped with those rosy blooms. Another gorgeous foliage perennial that I have in my garden and adore. This is the Helen von Steen Lamb's Ear. It has the most fuzzy and soft large leaves. It is so nice to the touch. The deer and rabbit stay away from it because they don't like this fuzzy texture, and it makes a really beautiful ground cover. It grows in a mounding habit and it gets quite wide, anywhere from 3 to 4 feet in diameter, but I have found it only to get about maybe 12 to 18 inches in height. This is how it grows. You can see in the photo. It likes full sun. It is deer resistant. They don't like the texture, so they stay away from it, and it is drought tolerant. And it says it blooms midsummer. I will tell you, I've had this in my garden for several years now. It has maybe sent up a bloom stalk once or twice, but it never actually bloomed. It just had a stalk that I trimmed off. So this is not going to be invasive like the traditional stackies or lamb's ear varieties might be, but it does get pretty wide, so it spreads a good amount. And it makes a great ground cover, like I said. So this one here says that it gets 24 to 36 inches in height. I haven't seen it get that tall. It does need sufficient spacing. I would say 36 to 48 inch spacing, and it is hardy down to negative 30 degrees Fahrenheit. Very hardy, very easy to divide. You only need to buy 1 or 2 of these plants and you can split them and have them everywhere. Really great plant. Some really pretty pink salvia. So salvia now comes in pink and white and purple. So you can see that they have the pink variety here, and they also have some purple varieties. And these are in their number 2 colored pots that are marked down from $14.98 to $12.88. They even have some Russian sage. Now, Russian sage is another beautiful upright perennial. It likes full sun. If you don't give it enough sun, or if it gets too much water or too much fertilizer, they will flop in the center and not be happy. But it is a really pretty plant with this really gorgeous kind of light purplish blue color. Stunning. Has a nice fragrance too. smells a bit like mint. This variety of Russian sage is called Blue Jean Baby, and it gets to be 36 to 48 inches in height and needs 24 to 30 inch spacing. Water when dry, hardy down to negative 20 degrees Fahrenheit, and blooms early summer through fall. Some delphiniums. Now these are about to burst into bloom. Look at that. Delphiniums are gorgeous perennials. Now these are also in their colored #2 pot, so they would be $12.88 as part of that sale. This variety is called Kingsley, and it gets to be 20 to 24 inches in height and needs 14 to 24 inch spacing. Water when dry. Now these are also a perennial that don't like it too wet, and they like full sun and hardy down to negative 40 degrees Fahrenheit. They bloom early summer through fall. So pretty. Now, of course, all of the perennials that you're going to buy at the garden center or nursery, they've been grown in a greenhouse, and they're going to have blooms when they get to the garden center because they look prettier for sale that way. So in your garden next season, they'll probably bloom a little bit later than they are here at the store. And look at this, fern urns. So they're beautiful, large Boston ferns that already come in a plastic urn planter. Look at this. And they are $39.98. So you just pick it up and plop it somewhere in the shade in your garden, and you are good to go for the season. They are already full grown. Look at that. Not a bad price considering you're getting a planter and all. And you can reuse the planter next year if you wanted to. And friends, it looks like the Boston ferns are on sale here at the Home Depot. They were $18.98, but now they are $12.88. So that is great for the 10-inch hanging baskets. If you've been watching my channel or even these videos for a while, you know how much I love this plant here. This is the Acorus Sweet Flag Ogon, and it looks like an ornamental grass, and it loves moist soils. So if you have a problem area in your garden like I do, this plant will thrive there because they're typically planted on the sides of ponds or anywhere where there's water. And they're evergreen. Here in my Zone 6B7A, they stay evergreen all year round. They retain this beautiful coloring. Now these have a bit of variegation. They're green and yellow. The color goes a little bit of a pale yellow in the winter and the cooler months, and then in the spring and summer they get a really vibrant chartreuse yellow color. Really beautiful. And the Acorus, as well as some of their ornamental grasses, are 2 for $20. These are amazing sales. Usually you don't see things start to get marked down until closer to 4th of July. So this is great that it's happening this early in the season. And this is a type of Carex. It's the Evercolor Carex by Southern Living Plant Collection. Has a variegated color scheme as well. I love grasses for movement and texture in the garden. They really look beautiful planted among other plants for that interest. And this one says it's great for a border, a ground cover, or container. It gets to be 18 by 18 in size, and it likes part shade to shade and hardy down to negative 20 degrees Fahrenheit or zones 5 through 9. Medium water needs. And 2 for $20 on these as well. Some more gorgeous perennials. You have some more salvias and lungwort, which is a beautiful shade perennial. Look at this foliage. It's like a green foliage with silver speckling, and they bloom in the spring. So this one just finished blooming, you can see. And it blooms in shades of pink, purple, and blue. So all 3 colors on the same plant. Very easy to divide. So I always am a big advocate of when you buy these big containers, they're selling their #3 containers for $19.98. But you can very easily divide this plant when you get home. Just make sure you keep the divisions and the transplants well watered until they start establishing some roots. But it's a great way to save some money and stretch your gardening budget by dividing them right out of their container. But this is a beauty. Love this. So lungwort, also known as pulmonaria. I was trying to find you a tag so I can show you some specs, but I couldn't find one. But in general, these are hardy in growing zones 3 through 9, and they certainly want to be in a part shade location. If they have too much sun, the foliage will start to crisp up, kind of like what you see here. So part sun, morning sun would be best on these. Holy heuchera, look how beautiful this is. Such a large leafed, beautiful heuchera. And this beautiful shade of like a peachy orange, maybe even caramel. So pretty. and it pairs so nicely on the side of this astilbe that is getting ready to bloom. We were here last a couple of weeks ago and the astilbe was still all in bud form, but now you can see that the plumes are starting to open up. Astilbe is gorgeous. It has this fern-like foliage and it likes shade. They also really like water, so they do well with moist soil, but well-draining soil, and fertilizer. So give it a granular all-purpose plant fertilizer in late winter, early spring, and they will bloom beautifully for you. And look at it alongside this heuchera. So let's check out the variety of this heuchera. Hopefully we can find some information on it. Now in general, oh, it just says peach. It's a number 3 for 1998. I don't see a tag, but look at the size of these leaves. They are huge. So pretty. In general, these do like a part shade location. There are some newer varieties that can handle a little bit more sun, but I would say if you are going to put them in any sun, a little bit, maybe up to 4 hours of morning sun that is a little bit softer. But these are really pretty, and this is a great way to add lots of color into a shady spot of the garden through the use of different color foliage and texture, like you see here with the heuchera and the astilbe. And some beautiful Siberian iris. I really love iris in my garden. I have several varieties. I have Siberian iris, Japanese iris. I also have bearded iris. They're just such a beautiful perennial. And when they're not in bloom, they look like a clump of ornamental grass, so providing texture and interest in the garden. So I really love them. This one is a dainty blue color. I even have a variegated iris that the blooms smell like grapes. It's the Alba variegata. It has like a variegated cream and green leaf with a light purple bloom. So pretty and fragrant, which is always a bonus. Now these are 1998. I don't see a tag for the variety of Siberian iris, but you can see how easily these can be divided. There's actually a division point right in the middle here. You dig this home, divide it right in the middle, and you end up with 2 plants right off the bat. Look at that. A lot of times nurseries will plant several plugs of plants into one container to make them larger for sale. So don't be afraid to split these up. They actually respond really well to that because they've been screaming to get out of these containers for a while. So they usually do well when they're divided and planted out. And the Proven Winners Wine and Roses Weigela. I actually have this one in my garden, and while this one is halfway done with its bloom show, mine is just getting ready to open up and kind of looks like this. It always blooms for me at some point in mid-June and is really beautiful, and the hummingbirds love these tubular shaped blooms. I really love dark foliage because it makes such a nice contrast to all of the green in the garden. So here is the information on the Wine and Roses Weigela. It says it's an award winner. Look at that when it's loaded with blooms. Isn't that beautiful? So this one here gets to be 4 to 5 feet tall and wide, and I would say that that's true. Mine's been planted for about 4 or 5 years now, and it is about that size, and it blooms in late spring. Hardy in USDA growing zones 4 through 8. And these containers here are $29.98 for a number 2. And look at this beautiful Proven Winners perennial. This is Amsonia, and the variety is called String Theory. And it is hardy in USDA growing zones 3 through 9, and it likes full sun to part sun. Now this has the most beautiful blue coloring with these little star-shaped blooms or flowers on the bloom. So gorgeous. It has this really fine textured foliage, and while it's green now in spring, while it's in bloom, it will transform to a gorgeous golden color in the fall. So not only do you get spring flowers, but you also get fall color out of this beautiful perennial. And these here are, let's see, they're a number 3 perennial for $24.98. The Proven Winners String Theory Amsonia. And look at this gorgeous Baptisia, also known as false indigo. Typically you see these in shades of blue, but this one is actually a deep color and it has a chocolate name. It looks like a really deep purple, and the center is going to open up yellow. So pretty. This Baptisia gets to be about 30 to 36 inches in height and in width. They are pretty drought tolerant once they're established, and they grow best in full sun. This is Baptisia Dutch Chocolate. It's in a number 3 container for $24.98. They're hardy in USDA growing zones 4 through 9. And look at this, is such a pretty variety. Here's a really pretty and eye-catching hosta. It has that bluish color on the outer margin with a chartreuse yellow in the center. Really pretty. Now I've had to remove the hosta in my garden because I deal with lots of deer, and hosta is like deer salad. But this one is gorgeous, and the variety is the Shadowland Autumn Frost by Proven Winners. It's a part shade plant, and it gets to be 12 inches in height. And it needs 24-inch spacing. Hardy in zones 3 through 9 or down to negative 35 degrees Fahrenheit. Blooms mid to late summer. Now, hostas in general are very hardy plants, very hardy. They can take tons of cold. They're also super easy to divide. In the spring, when they start emerging from the soil, they'll be like little nubs. You can dig up that clump, cut it in half, and spread it around your garden. And they're a great way to add lots of color to a shady garden because they come in so many different colors and varieties and patterns. And what I also like about these tags from Proven Winners is they'll tell you what kinds of plants you can pair with your hosta to make really interesting combinations. So it says pair with coral bells, foamy bells, lugularia, columbine, ferns, and so forth. So that takes some of the guesswork out of what would look pretty together. And these here are, let's see, number 3 containers for $24.98. Now, hostas do bloom. At some point in the summer, they'll send up some bloom stalks with either a light purple or white bell-shaped blooms that the pollinators absolutely love. But if you don't like the look of it, you can simply follow that stalk down, trim it off, and just grow the plant for its foliage. Look at this beautiful hibiscus. Now this is an annual, and these make really beautiful tropical looking annuals for a patio or by a pool. This is called the Hollywood hibiscus Rico Suave by Proven Winners. And that would be a fun name to say over and over again, right? When somebody comes over and says, oh, what is that hibiscus called? It's the Hollywood Rico Suave. And so this one here likes full sun, so 6+ hours of sun, and it is hardy in zones 9 through 11. So here my zone 6B, 7A, this would just be an annual. But if you were in a warmer climate, this would survive for you as perennial, and you can enjoy these blooms all year round. So this gets to be 4 feet in height and 5 feet wide. It is long blooming and very pretty. Look at that. So this is only an annual, but let's see how much it is. This here is almost a 2-gallon for $29.98. These hibiscus are also really pretty. They have 3 shades on one plant. So you get the pink, you get the coral, and you get the white. And these are $24.98. Let me see, I'll show you the tag here. These are by Bloom Select by Costa Farms. It's a tricolor hibiscus bowl. It has 3 flower colors and it blooms constantly throughout the summer. $24.98 for these. And they still have quite a bit of trees here at the Home Depot. And this beauty here is a Bloodgood Japanese maple. And this was the first Japanese maple that I purchased from my garden. Now I have 3 of them, and I have over 30 in total, different varieties of maples because we love them so much. These are typically what you see as a specimen tree in a front landscape for good reason, because they are beautiful. It has this deep burgundy color. They are typically a part sun tree. With time, they will acclimate and they can take a little bit more sun, especially if they're getting adequate water. They're medium-sized trees, anywhere from 15 to 20 feet tall and wide, and the Bloodgood is pretty hardy, down to negative 20 degrees Fahrenheit. And these here are, let's see, it looks like maybe a 7-gallon container for $110. Some beautiful golden arborvitae. Now the variety of this one is the golden emerald arborvitae jantar. Now the thing with the emerald arborvitaes or the emerald green is that they're not deer resistant. So if you deal with deer, you might want to be cautious about getting this variety, but what a beautiful golden yellow evergreen. I'm a big fan of evergreens. I think they add a lot of interest to your garden, particularly in the winter when all of our perennials go dormant. You'll still have some structure and something to look at outside in the garden. So this is a relatively compact arborvitae. So just like the emerald green, they grow more columnar in kind of a tighter shape, as opposed to something like the green giant that gets really loose and large. So this one gets to be 10 to 15 feet in height, and it needs 4 to 5 foot spacing, and it is hardy down to negative 30 degrees Fahrenheit. Very pretty. And these are $34.98 for a number 3 container. Here are some really pretty evergreens that have all of its new spring growth on the tips. And the new growth is super soft. Actually, this evergreen in general is very soft. This is a yew, so a yew densiformis, also known as a taxus, and they make really great hedging plants. They work well in part sun, and they get to be 36 to 48 inches in height and need 6 to 8 foot spacing, hardy down to -20 degrees Fahrenheit. The only thing with these is that the yew densiformis taxus, these are not deer resistant. So if you deal with deer in your garden, something to be aware of. There is a variety called the Japanese plum yew that is a little bit more deer resistant, but these are really beautiful. And they're in a number 3 container for $29.98. Well, that brings us to the end of the mid-May inventory here at the Home Depot. I hope that you've enjoyed checking out what my store has in stock, and I hope that you can find some of this inventory and these sales near you. Thank you so much for spending your time with me, and I'll catch you in the next one.